study and did the investigation that I did about many living waters. Like Mike's lesson this morning in Sunday school, after you take one of these subjects and you break it down, you begin to study it a little bit deeper, the meaning and the purpose of what is said comes out. As I began to explore this thing about living waters, because it's mostly a New Testament term, and we get accustomed to those things, and not necessarily that they apply only to the New Testament, but they also apply to the Old Testament. Moisture, as God has provided for man, and sometimes we don't see all that, comes in many different forms. Water, by definition, is one of the necessity elements of sustaining life upon this earth, whether it's physical or spiritual. That's the part I wanted to compensate on. And might I add, we have every opportunity to examine and to explore both. The water divided from the land in Genesis 2:10, as we so very many times look at and appreciate the fact, don't realize that in order for us to be made of dirt, it had to start somewhere. And as God brought the earth up and separated the waters and brought them back, we many times look at these things and don't look at them for the necessity and for the depth that they pertain. Water was made for man. It was already there. The earth was void and without form, not serving any purpose whatsoever, until God decided that he was about ready to create man. Had he not brought the dry ground up, what's the water world is where we'd be living. So even God's love for his creation, even in the beginning, helps us to understand those things which we realize as the purpose of all this on the earth. That's what it's for. This short span that we spend here, we have the opportunity to understand and realize what God's purpose upon the earth was. Psalm 147:18 says that even the melting of the snow brings forth a different kind of water and has a different purpose. So not all these references to water or moisture is for the salvation of man. But bringing that forth, God applied those elements to the earth so that we might have a better life. I was telling Mike at lunch today that I gave my snowblower to my mother-in-law when I left Indiana. She was tickled to death. My hope was that I'd never have to use it again. And that worked. But there are different kinds of moistures and applications that we make as God's expressed his love through moisture and through water. Did you ever wonder why God chose water to express himself to mankind just for the saving and destroying all of men except 8 souls? Was it not living water for those that got on the ark? Sure it was. Man would look at that negative and suggest that God was bad. He wasn't a very good person. He wasn't very good man. He killed all these men. But the whole purpose of that flood and that water coming forth was for the preservation of God's creation and his people to come. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves, why water? Have you ever asked yourself why we aren't baptized in grape juice? It's part of the Lord's Supper. It's got its standing. It's got its purpose, but that's not what it's for. The purpose of water, as brought forth, is for God to show his love to man. One time, upon a question that our oldest son gave us, he was frustrated because he was not getting the proper response as he tried to teach those around him that he worked with about the gospel. My answer was this: that if God said you had to eat 3 pieces of watermelon and 2 pieces of cantaloupe, men still would not obey that. Amen. They would still not listen. They would change it. Their remark would be, you don't have to do that. That's not necessary for salvation. Water is necessary for salvation. Amen. First of all, physically, to keep this body nourished and keep it in operation and keep it functioning the way it's supposed to. And the second cause we know is for that purpose of spiritual water. Water is the way to salvation. Sometimes we don't expect that. Sometimes we don't understand that. But he still is expressing his love with his children because he says, I'll make a way of escape for you. That way of escape is getting out of this world. That way of escape is for the 60 or 70 or 80 years that we spend here to have the opportunity to spend eternity with our God. Now, did he not save Noah and his house by water? Did he not save the children of Israel when he separated the Red Sea? See, the water and the salvation of water is a physical experience in the Old Testament. It shows us the salvation of what God's intent was and the purpose of the coming of spiritual water, or the need for that. David even complains as he cries in his bed that he waters his bed with his tears. And you might not think that has any application physically, but God has even given us the ability to relieve our tensions, given us an ability to let the heart sob, perhaps when we've not done what we were supposed to, and not lived the kind of life we wanted to, or the kind of life we should. But that's a different kind of water. It's a different kind of moisture. Again, God has provided, even David, with the opportunity of releasing those things when we don't do what we're supposed to do. Psalm 65:9 tells us that the other water is for the watering of the earth. Where would we be without food? Where would we be without the lakes and the fish that we catch? Where would we be about the earth and a situation and a climate where water was scarce? We took a trip across Texas once. I think it took us about a week. But anyway, I had this image that Texas was nothing but a dry desert. And I guess I got that from the old cowboy shows. I don't know. Surprised was I to see it's a very fertile, it's a different land. It depends on where you're at and what you're establishing. But even moisture in the west is a valuable element. And as we talked the other day about Europe and its poor water supply and its poor water quality, how fortunate we are in this country not only to have physical water, but to have spiritual water, to have that which feeds the soul. Oh, what a nourishment. What a nourishment. So what is this thing we call moisture with its different functions? The water of salvation is for the particular purpose. It does not water the earth, nor do tears like David bring salvation. But we do have the water of life offered to us. Embrace it, my brothers and sisters. We are so privileged to have heard about the water of salvation and the river of forgiveness. How fortunate we are. I'm going to give you a minute to turn to Amos 5:24 as we continue our understanding about this idea of living water, salvational water, physical water, that thing which provides the natural body processes. Amos 5:24 says, "But let judgment run down as waters, and the righteousness as a mighty stream." Again, this idea of running water, salvational water, cleansing water, is even given in Amos, even given in the Old Testament. And those that listened and understood and heard and applied themselves understood that's what it meant. And you've heard me say this before, the religious leaders of Christ's time, above all, should have known who he was. They were educated, trained, they could read, they could write, and they should have known who he was. But in reality, and I think some of them did, be honest with you, but in reality, what they didn't want is to lose their social position. They had not the blessing of spiritual water. They had all the blessings of the physical water from the Old Testament, their genetic line, everything that established themselves as a nation at that time standing. But they had no idea, understanding what spiritual water was, what it was for. Abundant water in our relationship with our God. Those who do not accept this spiritual water, we all accept the physical, we all accept what's provided for us. Isn't it nice to turn a tap on and get a nice clean glass of water? Mine isn't that great. I don't know about you guys, but mine isn't that great. But it's nice to have that ability within our family, within our homes. There are many nations in this country that don't have that opportunity. Water is just not available in the quality and the quantity that we have. Again, God has blessed this nation with the abundance of physical water, with the opportunity for us to understand, read, and appreciate the opportunity of spiritual water. Those who do not accept this water as offered are not of this family. They can drink all the physical water they want to. They can have every element that some say in all denominations, other denominations, about the water they drink, about the water they're exposed to. Christ said when he walked into Jerusalem, "Oh, this valley of dry bones." Wasn't that ironic that he would use that phrase and terminology? Because the water of salvation and the water of learning and teaching and understanding who God was, he knew was gone. The valley of dry bones, he was speaking specifically, not of Jerusalem, the city itself, but he was speaking of those that lived in that city. They didn't have the opportunity. They were given the opportunity. They just squandered it. Didn't take the chance to experience what would need to be done. But let judgment run down as waters. Another reference to the idea of a spiritual relationship with your God. And righteousness as a mighty stream. Sometimes when you say these things, I think some people fear those things. But judgment is a good thing. There would be many that would say, "No, I don't want to be judged. Don't judge me. You're not supposed to judge me. Judgment's bad." That's not true. Because you're going to be judged by this book and this word right here. That's the judgment you want. You don't want the judgment of the world or those around you. But we must be born again. Not of woman, but of water and the Spirit. So we can continue our idea and understanding and appreciate what this thing about water is all about. Jude verses 12 and 13, I'll give you a second there if you want to go to that. We're going to make another reference here to understand the purpose of those things which God has given us. Did man ask for water? No. Did he ask for physical water? There was a point in time where God knew he was going to be thirsty. Did he ask for spiritual water? Absolutely not. This is a phraseology and a thought of mine and a progression of maturity as a Christian that these people never imagined could even exist. If you'd have said that to the Sadducees and the Pharisees of Christ's time about living water, about spiritual water, about the Holy Spirit coming and living within you through baptism and having that application of the water applied to your soul and your spiritual life, they'd have called you nuts. They didn't believe that. It's not what they taught. It's not the things that permeated the religion and the teaching of the law of Moses at that time. Of course, the Sadducees didn't believe in the hereafter anyway. They didn't believe in life after death. The Pharisees, a smaller group, a political smaller group, would have tried to press that issue, but they couldn't prove it because no one knows what's beyond this life. And I think it's supposed to be that way. I think you're supposed to appreciate it. You have to mark your territory and mark your goal. You have to have something to work forward to. You have to have something to mature, something that gets you where you need to be. How dull life would be if we didn't have the chance to look forward to tomorrow. You know, one of these days, I'm not going to see tomorrow. Perhaps some of you are glad about that. I don't know. Some of you might appreciate that. But Jude 12 and 13, speaking of the followers of Cain, these are the spots in your feasts of charity. And when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Clouds, they are without water. Can you imagine that? Clouds without water. Physical experience. Carried about by winds. Trees whose fruit wither. Without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. Raging waves of the sea, foaming out of their shame. They were like wandering stars, to whom reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Without the moisture and the water and the application of Jesus Christ in your life, you can't make it. You have to be there. You have to experience it. Getting wet back here is one thing. But allowing the spiritual water to enter your life and control your life and direct your life and use this word, that's the key to the whole thing. I suppose we could probably baptize 300 or 400 people back here. What difference would it make? Got religiously wet. You've heard others say that. But those people are destined for that. They draw close to me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. We're going to go to Mark 1, 7 and 8. We're going to look at that for just a minute. But John the Immerser claims more for those that obey he claims more for those that obey the water baptism. There is a spiritual experience. If we ever get this across, without baptism, without the water application, you can't get there. There's a church out in California called Crystal Cathedral. It's all glass. And they have a religious ceremony every Sunday. They commune with one another. They pass daisies to each other. They turn around and shake hands with their neighbor in their pew. Nice thought, I just don't think it's going to get us there. Mark 1:7-8 tells us this, that John the Immerser preached, "There cometh one mightier than I after me, the latchets of whose shoes I am not worthy to stoop down and unloose. I indeed have baptized you with water, but he shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost." The second phase is affected by the first phase. If you don't get in this baptismal water back here and you take the first step and make your obligation and duty and responsibility, you're never going to have the other experience. It's never going to happen. That's why we have so many different doctrines and teachings and religious philosophies in all these different organizations, because they've never got wet. They've never been back here. They don't want to have anything to do with baptism. They think baptism is not necessary. So their religious organizations show that. They never grow. In fact, the last large organization we belong to is almost extinct. It's almost gone. And I told you about the division of the house that we dealt with when we went there. The preacher wanted a baptismal, believe it or not, Nazarene preacher. The elders and the directors of the board didn't want it. So we ended up with a beautiful choir loft. That church is no longer in existence. It's gone. It's gone. Doesn't exist. Sandy's mom went there for quite a while. The building's gone. It was close to a creek that runs through northern part of Indianapolis. The ground was soft. The water continued to rise. They put a basement in. It continued to fill with water, and it eventually broke down the foundation, and the building was unsafe. They tried to fill the basement in with sand, and they tried to support the thing, but I think they finally sold the property. But that argument was one of the arguments I told you about, the division of the house. When we walked in, you sat on one side or you sat on the other. That was one of the issues. But we went through that. So who won? Who won? The congregation lost. The people in that congregation lost, because they didn't have the opportunity. Now, Sandy and I were baptized by this same preacher, but over in the creek I was telling you about. Not for the remission of sins, to join the church. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was doing the right thing. And then I realized later that this was a mistake. But John the Immerser claims that there's more to just being baptized. There's a spiritual experience that involves with that. You can't have the spiritual baptism and experience without the first obeying the gospel of baptism. But you must be born again. Water is our river of salvation. It is the love and the expression of our God to us. I'll make a way of escape for you. Here it is. Listen up. Hear, obey. Do what I say you're supposed to do. You see, the prescription for eternal life, there isn't but one. You can water your garden, and you can water your flowers, and your tomato plants will come up, as Bob was talking about this morning. You hope all those things go well if you water them. They have to have water. So does the church of Christ, or it will not exist. It will cease to exist. 50 years from now, when Aaron or Cody are up here preaching, I want them to say, we had an old bald-headed guy down here who told us all about that, and that's where I first learned about water. That's where we're at. That's what we're trying to improve. That's what we're trying to get there. But John, the Immerser, and that's what I'm going to call him from now on, because we've taken this idea or this word of baptism and we've completely made it null and void for the purpose of what the purpose he was supposed to be doing. Because when you say John the Immerser, first thing you get an eyebrow raised. Because people are not used to hearing that. They don't realize that baptism is full immersion. They don't want to know it, for one. You know, I was sprinkled as a teen at 14 in the Methodist Church. But yeah, I've had it all, Bob. I've been sprinkled. You know, I've had it all. I've been baptized not for the remission of sins. I've been baptized for the remission of sins. But the application of the water took the third time. The application of what water was supposed to do and what God intended for it to do took a hold the third time. I'm glad he's patient. I'm glad he waited on me. We're going to go to Revelation 22:1, and I'm going to give you a minute to get there. Because I think we're so surrounded today by the internet and those things which are presented to us in a fashion that we have to deal with every day. We have to experience and understand that this idea of God's love for us is in Revelation 22:1. And he showed me a pure water, says John, dictated by Paul. He showed me a river of pure water, clear and crystal. It wasn't dirty water. Clear and crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and out of the Lamb. The information and the credit that we get and the understanding we have comes from the throne of God. I think the influence of the Holy Spirit in our lives, directing our paths, teaching us, helping us to understand the Scriptures, and helping us to put these things together and to live a life in this world. This world stinks. But I think unless we get the idea and understand that that's where that water came from, where it comes from. The spiritual water comes from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And he showed me a pure water of life. Not dirty water. Not water that wasn't supposed to do its job. Not water, holy water from the River Jordan. Not from that which we hear and understand from many religious groups, but it was crystal clear. Proceeding. Now, what other kind of water could come from the throne of God? What other kind of water could come from Jesus Christ? From the throne of God and the Lamb. The salvation of water flows from the throne and from the Lamb. Be thankful that that's where it comes from. Be thankful that we've had the opportunity to understand and see it. Be thankful that we're where we are. You know, we've had, Sandy and I have had several opportunities and have attended several different places and have heard a large number of religious philosophies. I love that term. This is the way to heaven. Follow the arrows. Go this way. Do what I say. Our group believes this, this, and this. If you don't do that, you're not going to make it. But we all know that's not true. Those are all man-made organizations. Revelation 22:17 through 19. I'll leave you right there so we can find it pretty easy. And the Spirit and the bride say, Come. And let him that heareth say, Come. And let him that is athirst, come. And whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. It's free, guys. Doesn't cost you a dime. You don't have to buy it down there. What's a bottle of water cost now? $1 or $2 a bottle. It doesn't cost you a dime. For I testify unto every man that heareth the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. I don't want to be in any of those guys' shoes. Verse 19, if any man shall take away from the words of this book, of this prophecy, God shall take away his part in the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. The road here hasn't been easy for us. We've traveled a rougher road and had to make our own way. But once we found this river of life in the living water, we both recognized instantly where we were and where we need to be. Was no doubt. Was no doubt. And the Spirit and the bride say, Come. That's what we convey to those that visit and those that we work with and those around us. We say, Come, drink of this water, refresh yourself, allow your soul to be quenched. It's the thing that man in general is looking for and won't admit. All people are looking for that opportunity. Why water? Because God said so. Boy, when you say that to people, you know, that's the way it is because that's the way God said it was supposed to be. It says right here in His book. You know, when you say that to people, I don't think they understand it's because that's the way it's supposed to be. The Romans at Paul's time, they would baptize people into the Roman family. And the reason for the baptism was because the Caesars had a genetic line that they had to follow. You could not be a Caesar unless your dad was a Caesar. I mean, that was the way it was. So they adopted men into their family. One of the adopted practices was they baptized these people in animal blood. They stood under it like a shower and baptized these people in animal blood. What good did that do? What difference did that make? Never touching or seeing or experiencing the water of baptism and the water of a free spirit. So let the heathen continue their folly in rejecting this path and the road of righteousness and the road of direction. You see, they don't hunger and thirst after righteousness. Sometimes we ask ourselves why we can't make headway with people. They're not hungry and they're not thirsty. The water doesn't mean anything to them. The moisture that God has provided for man for His establishment and His character upon the earth only means one thing, the physical. Give me a drink of water. What did the rich man say to Lazarus? Just give me a little bit on your finger. Just put a little bit on my tongue. Because that's all the righteousness and salvation and purity that I think I need. Just a little bit. You know, just wet the tip of your finger. Touch my tongue. That's Christianity, or that's the religious orders of the day. We're going to close with Mark 16:16, because once that we've bridged this gap and understood what moisture and water and the provision that God has made for man, beginning with dividing the waters in the earth, beginning with that, providing Noah a way of escape, providing the children of Israel out of Egypt a way of escape, providing those things which He has provided always for mankind. Always. But we're going to close with Mark 16:16, because this is the key to the whole thing. He that believeth is baptized shall be saved, and he that believeth not shall be damned. It's just that simple. Let's close with a song. There is beyond the azure blue a God